and that kind of dirty edge with weeds growing in it? And then are you talking like they swim into the woods thereafter and that's how you're seeing them in the woods? Or are they actually coming into that timber like a mallard would?
Yeah, so both.
Okay.
Some of our bigger openings, this gets into kind of hardwood management, but we opened up quite a few openings just with mulching equipment and kind of doing a timber stand improvement, just to kind of lower base area and promote some region. When we did that, we started seeing different species showing up in those openings.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
All right, welcome to the FowlWeather Podcast, folks. We have a great guest with us today. If you've been listening to part 1 and part 2 of the wetland management series, we gave a lot of know-how about managing wetlands and why they needed to be managed. But we have a real-life land manager, Ryan Dulaney, with us today from Arkansas. Ryan wears many hats. He's a land manager at Grindle Slough in Arkansas, and he's a land agent for the Farmland Group, plus has a consulting business known as Wildlife Strategies. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and looking forward to talking ducks and pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I know we've been talking about this for a while now and getting you on here. And I think I know that you're kind of a loyal listener of the podcast and listened to the first 2 parts of this wetland management series. So I wanted to get somebody that's, really on the ground in the heart of duck country in Arkansas to tell me what I did wrong in those first 2 episodes. But why don't we start with, a little, just so folks get to know you, our listeners get to know you, a little bit of your background, your qualifications and your current career trajectory that you're on, Ryan.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it brief. I guess got into duck hunting in 1999, duck hunting Cache River with my family, and went on a youth duck hunt and shot a double-banded greenhead, and it had a reward on it for $100, and I was really hooked at that moment on, and I really had no idea how special a time that was. It's gone by so fast, but I still have a lot of that passion. Went to Mississippi State, studied forestry and wildlife, worked for some graduate students in the James C. Kennedy Seed Lab, and met a lot of great waterfowl biologists that are scattered all over the country now, and wish we'd had some overlap, but you got out of there just before I did, I reckon. But have some really, really great memories of talking ducks in that lab, and just covering some really crazy ideas, and also seeing how some of those ideas have been researched, and we have some answers now.
You said seed lab, so I know what that is. Listeners might not, but this is like a grueling thing that nobody wants to do. It's like taking a core of soil and then sieving it and sifting through like all the stuff I talk about in those first 2 parts in moist soil wetlands and the seed producing annual plants. You're literally like straining through that mud and finding those seeds and then determining how much food is in an area. How painful is that, Ryan? I know the answer to this, but
well, the company was great.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That certainly made it not near as painful, and the pay wasn't all that bad. It was pretty competitive with anything you could do in Starkville, Mississippi. So it was work as you go, as whatever you had time. But I would say that nutsedge, I'm just not a big fan of the size of nutsedge seed. Having done that for 3 years, pick through core samples looking for those little black things. But we did some really cool stuff in there, and painted a picture of how much duck food was in the MAV, and it's still really interesting to look back on.
Yeah, it is really vital information we've gotten over the years. I mean, if I never see another core sample, I'll be a happy man. But
no, true.
I always said it's about 8 hours from like when you take the core sample to when you're finally done with it and it's dried and you know how much food is actually there for the ducks. So it's not the kind of thing Joe Duck Hunter goes out to his lease and starts doing, but we've got some good numbers for what we produce under different types of management now, which it was the goal of that, right? So
it was,
yeah. So why don't you expand then on your current job, and what you're into as far as the consulting stuff and things like that, just briefly here.
Yeah, so 2014, I moved to Arkansas after graduation and started working at Grindel Slough, managing a hunting club, which was probably not my dream initially, but became one of my passions as I learned more about resource management and wetlands in general. I liked playing with machinery. I liked playing in the dirt, and it kind of checked both boxes. And I kind of passed on opportunities to maybe do graduate school. I had a dog and a duck call, and I was ready to kind of go to work. So been there since 2014, doing that primarily day to day on the Langell River. And over the last 3 years, kind of expanded into doing some real estate and mainly consulting in form of property developments or improvements. And so we've kind of gotten a little business going doing that, and it's been real successful. And we've tried to just apply decades worth of wetland experience with a full service land brokerage, and it's been a good thing.
Yeah, it's your name. I've brought your name up to a few folks, and they're like, "Yeah, that Ryan guy knows what he's doing." So cool stuff. I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna ask you about this. I feel like I cringe when I do this. I feel like it's like asking people about the name of a hurricane like too soon after it happens. But
Yeah.
what was last duck season? We know it was a mild year, and last 2 weeks of January might have saved us. But the numbers don't lie. It was a rough season, and how do you think that drought really, affected Arkansas in the rest of the MAV, along with the low population and just mild weather? It seemed like the perfect storm, but what was your experience, Ryan? It's probably the same as everybody else, but yeah, give
Yeah,
her a
I could
run.
echo a lot of the same complaints or frustrations for sure. I mean, it was extremely challenging from a management and preparation standpoint. We were prepared as good as we could have been, but it was just more extreme. And we had some indications that, this weather pattern was going to set in, it was going to be sticky, and we kind of knew what we had to deal with, population status at the time. So we tried to prepare for that as much as possible. But from a management standpoint, it was just really costly and difficult to put enough water on the landscape to really feel like we were operating kind of the level we want to be at. I can't stress enough how extreme that stretch from July to January was, from a drought and weather perspective. It felt like from top to bottom of the MAV that the corridors and kind of the connective tissue between habitats was very severed. And
Yeah.
after viewing a lot of different properties and what I consider really dark bottoms, places that just don't see dry, that they're just wet places. A lot of these river corridors, they were drying up, permanent deadenings and stuff like that had, for hundreds of years, probably not had many dry periods were cracked soil. So we saw that going into the fall and knew that we need to be prepared for kind of a weird phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people felt it everywhere. I mean, it's not like we were absolved of this. Like we missed on it even up in central New York, right? Like it was just we had birds hanging in Ontario and Quebec above us in December. I mean, our season closed and we still had finally gobs of birds. So a lot of them just kind of never made it, plus the drought. I think the ones that came there kind of moved on. But pressure has to do with this as well, because when you don't have those places for birds to get away, pressure can become a thing too. So, what were your thoughts on, like how in those types of years that are really tough, do you do anything different as far as hunting pressure to try to, hold birds and basically be set for if new birds do show up? How do you manage that disturbance any differently on those tough years?
Well, I think most years we've got a pattern that works pretty good on how we want to move water across the landscape and place ducks on a property. And I would say that last year I just found myself trying to pump ducks into existence.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
continue to put water out in landscape, flooding more shallow habitat, putting more food underwater, making sure I had as much bottom and hardwoods flooded as possible, and with the hopes that I could fill that space. And the reality was, we were not filling those acres with ducks like we normally do.
Mm.
And so that was frustrating. We think we can manage disturbance really well, at least at Grindle, when we have an opportunity to have enough water out there. But when you're working that hard to flood that many acres, it really just gets to the point where the activity of pumping and managing water is another disturbance, and it kind of is just real frustrating. It's hard to move water from impoundment to impoundment without running birds out of where you have them, and
Yeah.
and with a drought year, they just don't really like to move around near as much. They set up on a pattern. They're very stationary. So even when you did put water in new areas, you didn't really have an immediate response. And we
Hmm.
normally see something a little quicker than a response than we did last year.
Yeah, you very often, I've seen it a lot. I talk about birds moving east and west kind of along a freeze line a lot, and they go up
Mhm.
rivers. They don't just, if they run out of food or whatever at a latitude and it doesn't get harsh enough, they can go east west. But they follow, in that, December, January period. Once they get south of like the Boot Heel in Missouri, they follow a lot of rain patterns and localized flooding, and you can see them get up and move like into a rainstorm, right? And then they'll, like, if you had something big go over the top of Grindle, then you'd have birds pop up, even if there's not anything really weather-wise to push them down. Just your local birds will kind of fly into that and then find that area. But if there's nothing that appears to be an event that would create habitat for them, they tend not to really move too much if those strong low pressure systems don't come through. So I'm not surprised that you didn't see much movement at all that way, or pick up birds even when you put water down.
Mhm. Yeah, it was super odd to watch, and we just kind of ran behind schedule because of that. You kept putting water in impoundments or areas that were kind of keeping up with your plan and keeping on schedule. Yet, you just didn't see a bird response on schedule. You're right. It was typically after you got even a half inch or an inch of rain, just some type of low pressure system, and the activity would go up, and they'd be more inclined to pioneer, and locate these new flooded wetlands. And I think because of that, we really ran at kind of a surplus of duck energy days where we had a lot of carryover food into February, March, and it was a really interesting year. We learned a lot from it though, and I
Yeah.
think going forward we can kind of take a different approach and maybe do it a little bit better.
Hmm. Did you get your water back? I mean, not that you need it now. You're trying to get it off of places, but did February, March, April pick up a little bit with that? That's the typical El Nino pattern, is that the
Yeah.
southeast gets wet, but I think that was more going towards the coast than it was really in the kind of MAV region. But did you pick up some water later?
Yeah, we did. It was January though. It was probably just before the freeze event is when we got our significant rainfall, and it really wasn't anything compared to what I've seen in an average year.
Hmm.
But we got a couple pulses, and it certainly helped, but it was just a little too late. And I would say February had a couple small rains in it, but just overall, it was easier to drain this spring
Hmm.
for us, in at least the bottoms. I think not having some of these river corridors at high levels has just made it easier to get water moving through the system, and it's kind of been well, the Lango River in itself is a pulsy system. It jumps and falls and jumps and falls, and it doesn't require much rainfall to do that. But lately, it's been operating probably a little more volatile than normally,
Interesting.
and I really think that's drought driven.
Yeah, yeah, potentially. And well, hopefully we'll have something else for you next year. We're going from an El Nino flipping right into a La Nina, which is going to give us a whole new bunch of patterns. Boy, I tell you, the way it's setting up already, I feel like I could do the long term forecast for next winter, but I'm going to wait till September to do that. I'm not going to stick my neck out that much for y'all. But so Grindle Slough is like 1,400 acres, but like what size acreage are you typically working with? And how does that affect how you manage or affect your capacity to attract and hold ducks on these places you help people manage?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies. I guess Grindel is a really good example of a place. It's just unique because it has like kind of one of everything, one type of habitat, every type of cover that you could have, from food plots to moist soil units to bottomland hardwoods to deadenings and swamp to naturally flooded bottomland hardwoods. Green Tree Reservoir. So it really kind of offer a lot of different habitats to ducks as they move through, and that place is really special because of that. We can hold quite a few ducks no matter what the weather is. We've got something they're kind of preferring. But some of the other properties that are under our management, at least on the wildlife strategy side, are we've got a row crop farm that is in development right now, and we've optimistic that we can do both well. And it probably looks a little bit different than what we do at Grindle, just because, farming is our priority there and we need to make an income. But that's a 230 acre property. It's, a row crop farm. And I think the biggest thing is, the listeners would probably want to think about it in the sense of not every land type is really kind of equal in its ability to hold ducks or how much hunting pressure it can take. And we've kind of seen certain land types that perform better, and obviously different conditions for hunting and holding ducks. But I really see that certain habitats just offer more for ducks and are better hunting than others. And it seems to be that the row crop landscape really just doesn't have as much going for it as it did maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And some of these really difficult places to manage, deadenings and swamps and stuff, are kind of tried and true. And we have some small properties. We have some WRP. All that stuff operates kind of differently. Ducks use it differently. It gives them, supplies them for their different needs. And so we work with landowners that kind of have all different shapes and sizes, but certainly some land can really handle a lot more hunting pressure and hold more ducks than others. That's just a fact.
Yeah, and like Missouri, there's a lot of cool stuff Missouri's done over the years, and that kind of can be a swear word to you guys too in Arkansas sometimes when they're holding Grand Pass is holding 250,000 mallards at one time, but some of that is because they really mix in refuge really well, and they did a study years ago that doesn't exist in the literature anywhere. But while I was there, I chatted with folks, and it sounds like their duck per hunter average goes up until they hit about 50% of their area is refuge, right? And so that's really telling that like some of these, I don't know if I'd ever want to push it that far on an area. But if you're at a quarter, you got a big enough piece of property, you can put a quarter of it in refuge. You can hold your own birds around a little bit. So, just maybe speak to that. Is that larger tract of land typically better? I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, but like, how is it? How is it better?
Yeah, it's just more insulation. The more acres, the more insulation, and again, more variety and diversity of habitat types. And it's just going to always offer more. Grindle specifically is mostly sanctuary in the sense of we probably are only hunting effectively 20% of that property, and then kind of operate with the thought that ducks being ducks and ducks moving around and doing what they need to do will kind of present good enough shooting and hunting opportunities for us. And we really kind of ramped that up about 4 years ago. We saw some cues. We paid attention to some of the more recent research that was out as it relates to disturbance, and we felt like we ought to make a decision to kind of take some of our really deeper wetlands and swampland and stuff that was more difficult to manage and just say, we want to manage for early and consistent water, early migrators, and, have submerged aquatic vegetation in this part of the property. And, when we decided to kind of move that into sanctuary, that was a game changer for us. And I really like to see one duck hole per 160 acres in even the bottomlands. I mean, that's the effective distance you need between you and a neighbor. And it's kind of what it takes to keep ducks around and not necessarily just hunt ducks on traffic days, but be successful at having resident ducks and hunting those when the conditions are right.
Yeah, these guys, I mean, that's my buddy up in Missouri. That hole they've got, I don't know, it's something like 20 acres or something that they lease, and they're in a larger complex of other leased wetlands and a duck club to the north of them, and they herd over there because there's nothing they can do, right? It's all they're just squeezed. And so some folks are just in situations like that, but other folks have the capacity to have these other types of habitat out there. And you had mentioned when we were talking last week or 2 weeks ago about the submerged aquatic vegetation being a game changer. And when my wife and I were working down in the MAV, going all over those wetland reserve program, those WRP tracks, there really weren't a lot of them. And most of them were hunted. Some of them were just deer clubs. but most of them were managed as moist soil. That is, they were dried out nearly completely in the summer. But every once in a while, there was this really nice big hole that somebody kept relatively wet and kept it in submerged aquatic vegetation year after year after year. And like you said, it was surprising how that did at certain times really hold a lot of birds as long as you didn't give it pressure, because there is food value in that. It's way lower in general. But you can't pressure something like that as much. So if a bird can sit in there and eat some aquatic vegetation, pick some bugs here and there, and find some seeds on the edges, they can make a living without that disturbance to some extent. And that sounds just, is that your general experience? Am I kind of hitting that on the head?
Yeah, for sure. It's really an overlooked habitat type, in my opinion. And it's stuck out with kind of back-to-back dry falls. We've really kind of seen an emphasis on that being a productive spot of the property for keeping large amount of ducks on. And I think they serve just a really important role in early migrants and the diet that birds are on in October when they arrive. They key in on these places that are perpetually wet.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a really good bug hatch in there too. And you just can't say enough about having warm weather and the ability to have aquatic invertebrates and other bug activity in and around those places, especially on a mild year. I really think ducks are good about making, a living on just natural vegetation and the things that come with it.
Yeah, I hit on this, I think, in like the part 1 of the wetland management series here. There's this funky thing that goes on, and it's in episode 6 of the Foul Weather Podcast, way back when we started this stuff, called like A Tale of Two Migrations. And there's this weird thing, at least for us at northern latitudes, we get ducks that are actually coming off breeding grounds in August and September when they don't have to move at all. They're just moving out of like that edge of farm country and up into the boreal forest in Ontario and stuff. And they're moving down to central New York to take advantage of like primo high productivity kind of farmland type wetlands, right? With lots of stuff going on in them. And if you think about this too, I think it probably happens as birds move out of the prairies a little bit, out of the western boreal forest and move in. If you're a duck for the first time, you've never seen a moist soil seed, right? You've made your living eating bugs to survive. And a lot of those plants haven't shut down yet. So, and some of those birds are, for whatever reason, I mean, birds are all different. We had Heath Hagee on here. We talked about that as well, that some of these birds are just going no matter what. They're not all just specifically affected by the weather, right? Of course, the weather has a good effect on the abundance of birds at any latitude, but some of them are just moving. And those ones that just move before a lot of the stuff is shut down, or they still have bugs on the brain, you got to have some places for them to sit. And you also have, you got things like widgeon and gadwall and shovelers that are going to make more of a living in those kind of constantly wet type areas as well. And so having that footprint, I think, is really key for y'all. And again, I mean, around here, if anything, we have a hard time drying stuff up and have it not be an emergent wetland or have SAV in it. We've got those constant, wetland areas, and where when you get down to the MAV, it seems like there's a lot more of that moist soil stuff. And we drive around whole entire big properties, and until they put water on it, there wasn't a drop of water there. And that takes a lot of energy, but B, it decreases the diversity of a property too, which sounds like a lot of what you're focusing on. So pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And it goes back to when we put the management in place to, basically limit disturbance on those places and make it a sanctuary. We really just helped our ability to attract early migrants, keep them on property for the entire season. And we really think that those birds are easier to imprint than maybe the birds that kind of pulse up and down the ice line and in the snow line. And for us, that's kind of where we figure we have to make a living going forward is trying to get these early migrants, give them plenty of space. And we can kind of work with those ducks over the season. And our numbers will fluctuate, obviously, given when freeze line moves around, we see influxes and we see birds leave when it gets just too bearable.
Yeah. And you talked about like the level of disturbance, pressure per 160 acres or something like that. And that's going to be part 4. We're really going to get into kind of how to manage disturbance a little bit. I've actually published from some work we did in Mississippi on effects of disturbance. Nothing like the Cohen Lab and those other folks in Tennessee have been doing, and other folks in Arkansas. But we're going to pull some of that information in and dissect it and get into that stuff a little bit more. So we'll maybe stay away from it a little bit today and not eat into two whole episodes. But that's probably one of my areas I'd call my wheelhouse that I'm really constantly jazzed about, because you can produce all the food in the world, but if you hunt it improperly, or if you just make moderately decent food and you hunt it improperly, you can make a place that could be a really spectacular lease or duck club go from 100 to 0 in about 5 hot seconds. So, and not shoot as many birds as you could. So we'll get into that real super heavy in this final installment next week on part 4. But as I said at the beginning, you listened to the first 2 parts of the wetland management series, and I went over kind of primary wetland management methods. And is there anything I missed? Is there something you guys are doing differently? Was the moist soil management stuff pretty straightforward as to how you guys follow through that process seasonally? Yeah. So how does that just to give a feel from a real Arkansas land manager? Are we headed down the right road? And
yeah, you hit the fundamentals just spot on there and phrased it really, really well. And I think that the only thing I'd add to it is just the difficulty of fighting with beavers or army worms or all the pests that you can kind of go into it with a kind of a game plan, but you got to have ability to pivot and have contingency plans in place. And I mean, like I said earlier, we work with a lot of different land and cover types. And, personally, I've just leaned on developing diversity in design and kind of my wetland management approach. I want to stress the importance of having a management plan. Every landowner should be working towards that. And they're great resources for landowners to get technical guidance on a per project basis or even a larger scale. We tailor our management guidance to specific property and landowner goals, but all wetland management for ducks follows the same set of fundamentals, which you've done such a good job of explaining. And you packaged it in a really great way for your listeners to get the bullet points, and from there, they can start to ask the right questions as they apply those fundamentals to their specific place, their specific duck hole.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of consulting and just help guys through the process of managing, invasive species, water control, all that. But it seems really like the biggest thing that a lot of folks don't have is time, and the time to adapt, right? In that mid-season adaptation to changing conditions seems like an absolute key thing, that you really take head on to make sure you get the full benefit of the land for the birds and for the hunters in general.
Yeah, so checkpoints is the best way I can describe that. Is you've got to just kind of, and that's what a good management plan has. It's got checkpoints and deadlines, and I think everybody can agree that we work better as humans when we have deadlines and when we have plans in place. And the combination of having a property that's diverse is a really great hedge. But you've got to make sure that you're managing for diversity continuing, which means you can't let your entire operation look the same or fill the same needs of ducks. So we really have to look at each individual wetland impoundment and tailor something to them based on wetland function and design and drainage and the host of different maybe negatives that it has or difficult aspects for it. We have to learn to work within those. And part of coming up with a plan is knowing what your limitations are. A lot of what we try to put in a plan is just help a landowner kind of look at their region and their property and see, what does my property excel at and what is my region running a deficit of. And we try to really encourage landowners and we manage Grindle very similarly to that. Okay, where the deficits are in my region is kind of what we want to focus on doing and do more of it. And that's been a really successful model for us.
Yeah, what are you missing, right? I teach that to students too, and that happens within a year, right? If it's a really wet year for whatever reason, and you have no problem having water on your landscape, it's probably a good idea to make some super shallow stuff or even mud out there, right? And then, vice versa, trying to find and fill in those those buckbrush and kind of willow holes with water when you're dry, and giving those birds safety. Like, what's missing from the landscape that duck might be looking for? And it might not always be food, right? You might actually be in excess food wise, and it might be something else that those birds are needing on that landscape. And it sounds like you're headed in that direction too, of providing them, what they're missing potentially.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we've worked with landowners that have not had a food deficit, and it's more common than you can believe. And certainly, the research is showing there's places like West Tennessee that run at a Duck Energy Day surplus, and I think that there's different areas and smaller regions that maybe have that, and probably pressure has something to do that. But like I said, we'll save that for a different discussion. But Grindle, when I got there in 2014, we kind of took an assessment and ran the Duck Energy Days the best that we could, and we figured out that it was a pretty large stopover for migrating mallards, especially early migrating mallards. And we keyed in on understanding that population is kind of who we want to manage for. And we figured out that because we had so many birds early and were able to keep them, we were running at a huge deficit on Duck Energy Days. And, that was kind of the aha moment where, okay, we figured out how to tailor a management plan to that property. And it was simply, we need to be able to feed more ducks here. And we've got enough birds that travel through this corridor. We need to do a better job of giving them what they need on the food side of things. We have plenty of cover. We had everything a duck needed other than the reserves. We couldn't give them enough to build fat reserves and keep ducks during some of the coldest months and rough weather.
Yeah, that's tough when you run out of food. I wouldn't call that a mistake. I mean, that's almost a good problem to have, right?
Yeah, I think if you do it right, for sure. You want to make sure that your birds are transitioning to a different type of food after the season's over and when things warm up. And again, we just noticed that we were running such a large deficit that we quadrupled our DED production, and we did that by developing more wetland impoundments, by planting a lot more hot crops for initially. But we've kind of reached a point now where we're starting to tone it back and be a little more systematic about what our needs are on DEDs and how we can get those, and maybe not rely so much on just saying that, hot crops are what we need to get our DED number right. We kind of looked at okay, if we've got enough hot crops to meet a DED number, let's try to take some of these other impoundments and do some different things with them.
Yeah, that's one thing that people miss is that, and I find that refuges and state game lands and stuff miss on this too. And a lot of those places are pulling away from hot crops at all because they don't see them as coinciding with wildlife conservation. But the reality is if you put 100 acres of, flooded corn in some place, that's a lot of birds you're feeding. And then your remaining acres, you can do whatever else you want with, right? And it's the same with your focus is still ducks, duck conservation, duck hunting. But if you've got that, it gives you that latitude. Once you've got that energy, it gives you that latitude to do some things on the side as well. So you're talking about all the right things, right? You come in and you assess. And what are the most common mistakes when you see going onto a property the first time that wetland managers make about, when they're trying to attract and hold ducks? Like, what are those common mistakes out there on these properties that you see?
Well, I think the most obvious is trying to grow crops on really poor sites. I see a lot of poor attempts at developing new wetlands that ultimately don't function well and in turn don't build much value in the land. We see probably 50-50 on poor crop, effort, and somebody trying to design a wetland and just doing it without the without the proper specifications. And you really got to make sure when you design these things, if you're going to design it to grow crops on it, it needs to look this way. And if you're going to design it to just do moist soil and be really diverse with every acre within that impoundment, well, that looks a lot different too. And so we kind of see people get caught in between where they try to maybe do a little bit of both and do both poorly because of that. And the thing that we've seen is you can't take years off with duck management. So we want to make sure that what we do for that acre on that year is maybe not going to give us the the best or most DEDs, but it's gonna be our most consistent and reliable route to go with that management, because we think that ducks are obviously great at imprinting on these wetlands, and they will rely on a complex of these wetlands to survive during the winter. And we just know that, hey, some of these impoundments or some of these field designs are just not conducive to doing that. We need to go and do something that we can surefire be productive in. And we see a lot of success with taking that approach rather than, you know, trying to go corn in a in a really wet site with beavers running through it. It's just amazing to see what people try to pull off.
Yeah, just so I don't know if you can hear it, but my wife just got home from work, and we're just gonna roll right through. Ryan and I were gonna take a break and chat while my wife came home from work, but we're just gonna let the dogs bark as a good background sound. So, hey, I haven't disclosed this to my listeners yet, but my wife does work for Ducks Unlimited, and so if there's any bias in my comments, that's not why. Honestly, like I've worked with scientists at DU. I worked with Delta folks. I work with Fish and Wildlife. I work with state agencies. There's pluses and minuses all over that board. But just so folks know on the podcast listeners that we are truly a full blown duck household here in Jack's Reef. So the real genuine organic conversation that we're having and talking to duck hunters, I think is really something unique out there. And one of the things you mentioned the other day we were chatting was like, it's so good to see science being incorporated into the decision-making process. And that's what I like about what you do. And by the way, like, I want to go back and be a land manager myself and do more consulting and stuff that I do instead of being a professor. So when you said, hey, I was thinking about going to grad school, I think you landed in a pretty darn good spot. So be happy with that. Maybe someday we can swap positions. So anyhow, I'm going to have students listen to this podcast series anyway, because I think it's super beneficial. So mallard's king, obviously, in Arkansas, and hopefully will be for the foreseeable future. But when you're diversifying a hunt club and thinking about, alternative ways to attract, there's, a bunch of different species out there. And so how do you set up for those other species? Because sometimes like this year, the mallards, hey, the population's down compared to others. And then on those warm years, sometimes they don't show up till later. But what are you guys doing to, and do the hunters really care if those other species are showing up? Those they're not really calendar migrants, but they're usually there by the time the season opens up. Those other smaller bodied dabbling ducks. What's in the management toolbox to attract them and hold them around more?
Yeah, so we've probably alluded a little bit of that just with the diversity approach, but I really never gave it a whole lot of thought until a few years ago. One of the family members that I was hunting with of the owner just mentioned that, our hunting had been great and we were shooting some hour limits and this was fun, but it was a 6 duck limit and we were just missing 2 others on quite a few hunts. And that kind of been a trend going forward. And of course, we were thrilled to have the mallard numbers we had and been successful. But, he raised a good question. And I looked at it after the season and said, well, am I doing a good job if I'm over targeting maybe my management scheme for one species? And is that something I should lean on going forward? And ultimately, I just figured it wasn't. It was something that we needed to change, and we needed to incorporate different vegetation, different timings of floods, different timings of drawdowns, and try to make an effort to having a property that was attractive to more than just 1 or 2 species. And my boss and I discussed kind of on a regular basis, what the future is of migrating waterfowl and future of duck hunting, and kind of come to the consensus that we need to have our bets spread out over multi-species. Mm-hmm. And as far as what's in the toolbox to do that, I think we're still learning what that is. I certainly think on the design and development side, we've taken a different approach to designing new wetland impoundments. And maybe our flooding regime has changed a lot more than we kind of can notice right now. I think we probably feel a little bit more pressure to do early flooding than we used to, or at least than we did 7 or 8 years ago. And so there's some things that are just leaking into our management that is purely just from observation and making changes year to year to kind of promote that gadwall flight. And, to be honest with you, Mike, we have a lot of coontail now in the Langdale River bottoms. The gadwall kind of become our biggest groups of the year. And so it's been an exciting thing to have that during our first 7 or 8 duck hunts. Big finishing groups in the woods are typically gadwall flights, and they're a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
been
they
a really
are.
great addition, and it allows us to get out of the woods sometimes a little faster and not wait on that, 10 a.m. mallard flight that, our area is known for. Now I feel like sometimes we have good hunts and we get out early, and that 10 a.m. mallard flight is able to get in the woods and settle in.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a great comment. And I made that, as I was going through hunting season last year, and I had a decent season. I just ended up kept getting out in a few spots locally through a draw system that nobody else wanted to go to push through, and got in there and was usually out by 9 o'clock. And if I didn't have birds on top of me right away, I might shoot like a bird for the dog and then just get out of there, right? And then
Mhm.
talk to folks that went and scouted it in the midday or afternoon, and birds are just piling into it. That's a place that only hunts till noon. There's a lot to be said about getting in and getting out of a place, and not letting every duck in the neighborhood know that there's a gun in that marsh, and giving them some comfort. I think I'm a big fan of the half days myself. There's a lot of variability across the landscape though as to whether that works or not too. So just as a lot of these ducks are different from each other, the landscape's a little bit different too.
100%.
Um,
And the one thing I'd add, Mike, on the tool side, and I don't want to overlook this, is it's something that we picked up on was, in our hot crop impoundments, our corn and rice impoundments, we really made an effort to start managing our turn rows or our edge and
mhm.
focusing on what that edge vegetation is comprised of. And I think that has been one of the things that has taken our species just to a whole nother level. I mean, I don't remember having, 10 years ago or 11 years ago, it'd be common to see pintails in the woods. But now that we have so many more pintails and green wing teal hanging around the GTRs, they're kind of becoming part of the game now. And
Mhm.
I really, the only thing I can attribute that is probably managing our edge better. When you have 200 acres of impoundments and you put an acre in every impoundment, you add it up, you probably got 20 acres of maybe edge habitat that is smartweed or panic grass or any number of small seeded plants that we just did not have when we were going wall to wall hot crops or wall to
Hmm.
wall millet. And it's a little more difficult to manage, but I really think that, you can get a lot out of your edge habitat. And when you flood these impoundments and they have varying depth within them, edge is where these ducks are really, really keyed in on hunting for stuff. And so when you have a nice thick turn row or levee break or something like that, they spend a lot of time hunting for resources there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool stuff. And so I think you're talking about a little bit like they'll land in that open stuff, species that usually don't go as much into the woods, or we don't think about going into the woods. And they'll land in that kind of dirty edge with weeds
Mhm.
growing in it. And then are you talking like they swim into the woods thereafter, and that's how you're seeing them in the woods? Or are they actually coming into that timber like a mallard would?
Yeah, so both.
Okay.
Some of our bigger openings, this gets into kind of hardwood management, but we opened up quite a few openings just with mulching equipment and kind of doing a timber stand improvement, just to
Hmm.
kind of lower base area and promote some region. When we did that, we started seeing different species showing up in those openings. But the big change over the last 4 years seems to be within our impoundments that are on, adjacent to the green tree reservoirs or adjacent to the woods themselves. We have these other species frequenting them now and they're hanging around. And a lot of times they just will follow the mallards into the shooting holes and you'll get opportunities at them. And I just think we just look back at 9, 10, 11 years ago, that just wasn't common. So
Right.
so something has
Yeah.
changed
Hmm.
and I hope that we're picking up on that change and trying to do a lot to flex our management towards it.
Yeah, I'm going to spitball one here a little bit, and just that mallard numbers are down so much. And, I've seen folks talk about how mallard harvest has declined, since whenever we were at our high there, back 10, 12 years ago, and it's been declining for quite a while since. But if you look at Arkansas's mallard harvest over longer terms, I mean, you guys were like in the million mallard range, and then the 800, and then the 700, and then you were always around a 500,000. And I mean, geez, if you guys hit 300 to 400,000 this year, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what those numbers turn out as. But there's just a long-term decline in mallards, and that's even during a cycle of like ups and downs in populations. And I've ran that correlation with how well harvest numbers are fit to, the population. And you guys you get mallards every year, but you also have kind of a declining trend. And I just wonder if like, is there extra space in the woods now that wasn't there before for other birds? Because if you got that many mallards in the woods, that's a lot of interference and competition for food resources and things. So maybe it's just allowing those other birds to go in the woods. I don't know. I mean, I work a lot on that. These birds tend to all do something similar but slightly different, and that's how all these dabbling ducks live together. When you take something as abundant as the mallard in Arkansas in the woods and you start to reduce that number, it might ease up where these other birds can go too. Not sure. It could just be your management with opening holes as well. But
I think you're spot on there on the carrying capacity aspect. It just there's a void in some places, and these smaller ducks are doing a really good job of filling it. And quite honestly, they decoy so well, it's made it a lot of fun for us. And we see that the gadwall and the wood duck is a pretty reliable species to manage for. And for us, that's our business model is we want consistency in our product, and those two species, they're doing their job.
yeah, I'll bring this one up, and we didn't chat. We didn't. It's off topic from where we were going with stuff a little bit, but as I built the podcast, and of course I'm going to pay attention to Arkansas. I mean, it's duck capital of the world in general, and a lot going on this winter with birds not showing up and things. And I just was looking at social media, and I did not know that shooting at wood ducks first thing in the morning in a GTR was like a no-no, because you're supposed to like leave it quiet till the mallards show up. It's like a whole new beast to me that I hadn't heard of. And that's a public land thing, but I'm guessing it's not as much on private, Ryan, or
I've always abided by the same rule,
okay.
and the old timers are the ones that kind of taught me that. And it was, yeah, I think it was twofold. I think it's a respect for not knowing necessarily what you're shooting at, and it
Mm-hmm.
being a fast quarry and potentially needing more shots to bring that bird down, and just having that much gunfire in the woods that early around people was kind of detrimental. But I also give a lot of credit to these ducks, like wood ducks, that are extremely intelligent birds, and they typically will find the woods, the edge or the water edge, wherever the water is starting to push up, whether I'm pumping or we're
Mm-hmm.
getting natural flood water, and they'll pioneer and colonize those spots. And I really firmly believe that having a lot of wood ducks helps your mallard numbers when they do show up, because I think the mallards are keying in on those wood duck populations, and they know that those wood ducks are pretty stationary birds. They get on a pattern, and it's kind of what makes them susceptible to hunting, is that they will kind of do the same thing day in and day out. And we just incorporate that into our management with having small little impoundments that are kind of off the beaten path, that are very woody. And we, on travel days where we have people coming in town or leaving, we'll target wood ducks so that we don't have to burn a morning hunt, in the bottomlands themselves. And
Right.
so,
Right.
there's just a lot of opportunity to the wood duck, because they taste great, they're fun to
Oh,
shoot,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're really predictable animals.
Yeah. Yeah, James Callicutt, who I interviewed on here a while back on the Kitchen Conversations, and we'll have James back on because he's a wealth of knowledge and on the Mississippi side of the river in the MAV, and works at Mississippi State in Starkville now. But James and I don't know if it was James or me or vice versa. This is when we were shooting shovelers on catfish ponds, which sounds like not a thing, but when you got new dogs and a bunch of grad students that all want to bang away, and it's the only leash you can afford, and you can take six guys up and pile up six ducks each, it's kind of a fun little shoot. And you wrap them in bacon and kebab them and put them on the grill, and they're not horrible. We'll just go with that one. But we came up with something like, it was either love the gadwall and embrace the shoveler, or vice versa. I can't remember. And the end of it was, because hell, I don't know if the mallards are showing up this year. So I've always tried to get a little more cred to the other ducks out there. And I've shot a lot of gadwall in my life. They've kind of saved the day. The southeast coast, when you start getting into like South Carolina and stuff, like that's the the gadwalls like the new mallard for them, because they've really plummeted, numbers wise compared to y'all. I'm not a mallard purist. You can hear that, but if I could just shoot 4 greenheads each day and put them on the grill full skin, I don't think there's, other than the wood duck, I don't know, there's not a lot better eating out there for your amount of food, plus just a great sporty bird in general. I don't think there's a lot of folks in Arkansas that are gonna, argue that one for sure.
Oh, you're so right. Well, it's hard to get a wood duck to talk back to you, decoy, and do all the things that a mallard does that makes it fun for us. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, a four mallard limit of all drakes is a perfect day, and I certainly would never want to stick it out for another duck if I had that opportunity.
Yeah, we're on the same page for sure. So Ryan, tell our listeners a bit more about the area you cover and the services you provide through Wildlife Strategies.
Yeah, so I hope we've hinted on a little bit of it. I spend most of my time on the ground in Arkansas and some in Mississippi. I'm partnered in a land agent with the Farmland Group, and they hold licenses in Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Missouri, and also Georgia. So really the entire MAV. Wildlife strategies for us is kind of the development consulting side, and Farmland Group is really just kind of a fully integrated company for a landowner land services, from a real estate brokerage, farmland appraisals, farm lending, and now farm management and wildlife is kind of the other arm. And our mission with Wildlife Strategies and Farmland Group on the recreation side, on the hunting side, is to kind of locate and develop farms and recreational properties for a specific client. And we pride ourselves on using science-based waterfowl management techniques. And we work with a lot of guys, obviously just like you, Dr. Mike, and some other folks in Mississippi that are really high level waterfowl biologists. And what I try to kind of bridge is the manager side, and working with a landowner that wants to be a science focused management scheme. And then, I can kind of bring in the reality of it and what's doable and what the budgeting and all those items look like. And so it's a suite of products that we think is really good for folks that want to get into land ownership, specifically in and around hunting, but also just farmland investing.
Mm-hmm.
We're really happy to be expanding. We hope that, Wildlife Strategies will continue to expand to other states, but, right now we're pretty MAV focused.
Yeah, start with your core and then build out, right? So if listeners want to get a hold of you, what should they look up to find you, Ryan?
Yeah, so you can find us at our website for Farmland Group, which is farmlg.com, or you can find me at Wildlife Strategies on Instagram, or find me at Facebook at Ryan Parker Dulaney. And I encourage all your listeners that come through Arkansas to reach out, tell me how your hunt was, what you liked about Arkansas, what you didn't like, for better or worse. I'd love to know, and I'd love to share coffee with anyone that comes through town, a local diner, and meet more listeners. And we want Arkansas to be a destination going forward, and we think it always will be.
Yeah, so out-of-staters, the nicknames for out-of-staters in Arkansas, I learned that this winter too. Not always looked fondly upon, but it's there's a reason it's a destination, and you might regret saying, share a coffee with a local diner, because you might see me down there this winter. We'll see. I'm trying to get in a big game hunt out in Utah, maybe near where my little brother lives, and then do a trip from Montana across North Dakota, South Dakota, little duck trip that way. And I might be able to squeeze in. I actually think I'm flying to France to do some mallard research on the Mediterranean that actually couples with our mallard stuff we're doing here. And that's probably going to be in January. And I don't even know how to get behind a gun to shoot a farm-raised duck in France, but I'm sure as heck going to try. But maybe we'll find some time with you, Ryan, and hopefully I can get down and see y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know where to find us. We'll be waiting on those mallards, and that's just what we do.
Yeah. So, I'm really passionate about training that next generation, and you've gone through the university end of things. And so what do you really see as, the role of university education? We're going to kind of take it out this way and then talk about maybe what the new generation of duck hunters kind of really need to know. But like, how do we keep making quality students that really know how to conserve wetland habitat and manage wetland habitat and kind of make duck hunting for us, for better for us all across kind of duck country. What are your thoughts on how that model works?
Well, I'll lead by saying I had a great time studying both forestry and wildlife in school. And I honestly, in high school, didn't even know that existed.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to Mississippi State, I learned pretty quickly that it was actually a pretty big deal there. And so maybe that just happened by chance, but I think what y'all do is great, Dr. Mike, with your program, and also trying to get some of these students to be hook and bullet first, and getting them exposure is just the key. I mean, we've got to protect the North American model, in my opinion, and part of that is teaching what it is, how it works, and why it's different than all these other places that have such huge conservation issues. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really encouraged by how diverse the field is becoming, and I think that's going to serve us well in the future. I think a duck biologist looks a lot different than it did 40 years ago, and I think we talked about that at the North American Duck Symposium of that's really a positive thing to take away is waterfowl conservation is really diverse now, and it's a thing from one coast to the other, and we're more organized than we ever have been. And I would say for the students, you get your boots on and get in the swamp and try to do as much on the ground as you possibly can. And you can always reel back and do the research stuff after your undergrad, but use that undergrad summers to really get dirty. And I think what's going on at like Five Oaks Research Station is really going to be great for the state of Arkansas. And I'm seeing that other people are following your footsteps and doing these programs and kind of expanding them into not just being research, but kind of taking the burden to put in good hook and bullet professionals and resource managers. And I regrettably need to do better, probably of engaging. But I would say that youngsters that are wanting to get in the field, the best thing you could do is just reach out to folks, ask to come help out. If you got a local guy that has a duck club, owns a duck club, stay on him about trying to get some exposure. Get out there, give him a hand. And that's the way to kind of get your foot in the door of doing more waterfowl work.
Yeah.
And I think opportunities kind of follow in after that.
Yeah, I think like the best thing that I've ever owned in my whole entire life for my experience as a waterfowl enthusiast and somebody who's just become super passionate about wetlands is chest waders, right? Like like when we do a field course with the students this summer, that's the first thing we do is we pile into vans and we drive down the road to the state game lands and National Wildlife Refuge, and we get students out not just to stand in the wetland, but like literally like kneel down where like if you let your arms down they're in the water, and just be immersed in that to start to feel like, hey, this is what a duck feels like, right? And start to see that environment a little bit more. I think and I've said this in the wetland management series, it's true of managers too, just get out of your truck, like go into these things. And I've been in them in the middle of summer. My goodness, that assessment we did in the MAV with my wife. I mean, I don't really want to see another cottonmouth if I don't have to, but boy, did I learned the guts of those places, right? And that just matters so much to these kids. Get out of your books, get in the field if you can, and go to schools that take you into those places too. So really good comment, Ryan. Not just the young kids, but like the next generation of duck hunters out there. And you, like, what I like about you is you have, for all the bad stuff that is going on in the world and in the duck world at times, that your optimism is almost contagious about this stuff. So what is your key message to that next generation of duck hunters out there about how to enjoy duck hunting and keep duck culture across duck country with us?
Yeah, well, I think the mentorship program is something that we need to expand that outside of just the university programs and do more of that through the private lands manager role. And there's plenty of opportunity for guys like me to do a better job. And I hope that we do going forward. But I really believe that duck culture, at least in the MAVs in general, is a lot better than what we can see at the moment. And the reason why I say that is there's so many private landowners that are focused on making this duck thing work, and we have a massive economy that's tied to the resource and people's enjoyment. And we have new landowners and hobby managers, especially since COVID, that are entering the game and doing a lot to improve habitat and want to learn more. And they're they're hunting first, but they're becoming conservationists second. And we see guys that do this from investment standpoint. Is this a hobby investment? I want to own a place. I want to make it better, and then I might keep it or I might sell it. And so we see people that are keyed in on the economic value of the duck, but also just what that offers, the human to have a purpose to get up every day and go to work for something other than money, and doing it for the resources really, really gratifying, I think.
That's what fascinates me is, just the passion of these people. And you get somebody, it happens, it's contagious, right? Like maybe you just grew up as a deer hunter. That's what I did. I mean, and then man, I found ducks, and it just, I never looked back. And there's just so much positive going on. I mean, waterfowl populations, despite their fluctuations and some species being still not doing so hot, right? Relative to a lot of other birds, I mean, we're killing it, and they're going to cycle. And I'd say we're in a tough time right now. But there's a lot, and we've dug ourselves out of this hole before, right? So that's where I'm super, super optimistic. There's tons of good people at the wheel doing really good work. As you said, there's, private land managers really cranking out some great habitat. I do feel maybe on the, public land side, at times there's things we could do better, but I think that's just the hindrance of government in and of itself, right? And I heard something like, what, 75% of the food in Tennessee or something is on private lands, and that's that's not surprising given the disparity in the direction of how management on private versus public lands, seems to be going. But I'm also encouraged by, I think some of that is we got in a deficit with students that knew what they were doing and going and working on these places. Like they'd walk up to a water control structure and just go, nope, don't know what that is. But now, like we got these programs like Five Oaks and what we're doing up in, believe it or not, in New York, and we're pumping these students out and putting them into management positions, and they're starting to pull boards and monitor for invasive species and think about the plant diversity, and not just for the ducks. I mean, that plant diversity affects all the wetland wildlife that uses it. So I see, like what you said, I think we're in a pretty good place to leave things better than what we found it, right?
Yeah, we are. And we're starting to reverse some of our mistakes over the last 70, 80 years of how we've kind of changed the landscape, and we've seen what we've gotten wrong. And, we continue to make a lot of mistakes, sure, at least on a continental level, but there are small areas that are really getting fine-tuned with management, and there's enough people that care. They get a lot of stakeholders in this, and I think we have to get it right, and I think we will, especially if the sport can continue to grow. I mean, I sure think it can. I think there's room for it to grow, and it'll look different than it did than it does right now. Just like, back in '99 when I shot that double banded mallard, things looked a lot different then.
Right. Right. Yeah, this is the first I've seen a bottoming out of the mallard population, honestly. So, but then again, we've got these eastern mutt mallards over here, and I mean, imagine being at 2 mallards a day. It was tough times. So
yeah, but the culture of duck hunting is so interesting about that, and I encourage all your students and young folks that want to get in the field to make sure that you pay attention to what duck club culture is, and maybe not saying it needs to be in the MAV where historically it was a big deal, but anywhere. I mean, it does exist in a lot of different places, and you can learn a lot about, obviously, waterfowl, but why people did it, what the motivation is, what the reasoning behind why they're so invested in an animal. And, it's not a common thing. I mean, majority of Americans certainly don't care near as much as we do about a duck, but there's some really great people out there that care a lot. And I'm just encouraged that if the younger generation will reach out and ask for that mentorship opportunity or learn the duck club culture, I think that they will find a lot more enjoyment out of hunting, even if that does look like 2 mallards. And
yeah, that's a good point.
And there's a way to do that.
Yep. No, that's a great comment, Ryan. We'll leave it with that. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. And I encourage listeners that are, interested in maybe linking up with Ryan to help out on a duck club or a lease or something to give him a jingle and get a hold of him. So and don't expect that this is the last that you're gonna hear from Ryan Dulaney on the FowlWeather podcast. I expect to see him back here as a repeat customer, given his knowledge of the MAV. And we'll probably check in on you the season and hope that it went better than last year. But we've been doing this with folks, and some folks are not keen on it, but I try to get the guests to take us out with the tagline. You think you can handle it, Ryan?
Absolutely.
Cool.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, and may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.
Bingo. Thank you.